She was ready to return because the bet had already been made. When the girl woke up, she heard someone calling the maids, as the mistress had woken up, but she could not understand which mistress they were talking about. The first thing that came to her mind was that she was dead. What happened remained a mystery to her. The girl had no idea who she was now, and what all this noise around some lady meant. There were some unknown memories in her head, and a feeling that she needed to rest. A stranger entered her room. All the servants froze in place from surprise. It turned out that the gentleman does not come without warning. One of the maids reported that the mistress's condition was critical. The stranger was surprised by her calmness, as he thought that upon seeing him, the lady would start screaming and throwing objects at her. The gentleman was informed that his wife had had an accident and needed to rest. Carefully taking a lock of her hair and looking into the girl's eyes, he said that now she was even pretending to love him again. The gentleman came to inform that he would not be in the mansion for some time. At that moment, the girl realized for sure that she had died, since she had a look-alike with whom, it seemed, they did not get along. Something was very wrong, and she could feel it. The servants hovered around the girl, as if worried about her, repeating the same thing over and over again, that she needed rest, since she had recently been injured. Her head was hurting like hell, and memories of another person kept appearing in her head. Silver hair flowing down her back to her waist, bright eyes. She finally remembered her name, Sarah Loperan, the most beautiful lady of the empire, the famous Duchess of Loperan, the neglectful mother of the young protagonist of the novel Tattered Wings. The girl couldn't believe that she had become a character in the novel she was reading. Sarah tried to calm herself down, but she was having trouble doing so, since this heroine was hardly mentioned in the plot. Could it be that she really became the mother of the main character, and this is not a dream? After a few minutes of acceptance, the girl realized that she would have to live here. Sarah was devastated that she became the mother of the main character instead of a supporting character, since her son was a completely inadequate killer. He was capable of killing even her if she got in his way. One day, a girl asked this madman to let her go, and he seemed to agree, calling himself generous. However, he warned that if he caught her, her legs would be bound with iron so that she would never leave him again. The protagonist of such a novel usually becomes that way because of his upbringing, especially when he has evil parents. In such cases, the main character gets rid of everyone who irritates him. Sarah was so hysterical that tears started flowing from her eyes. She thought that she had a bad relationship with her husband, and now she had a psychopathic son who would be obsessed with the heroine. If she wants to survive, the only way out is to improve her family relationships before it's too late. The problem was that Sarah didn't know who to start with, her problematic husband or her son, whom she hadn't thought about for years. Outside, she saw a child who was incredibly cute. The girl began to guess that this was the boy from her memories, and that he was her future psychopathic son. Sarah had never seen such cute young protagonists, yet this world was strange. Where to start was still unclear. The next day, the maid rushed with breakfast to wake up her mistress and prevent her from dying of hunger. The maid asked the mistress not to worry about the affairs in the mansion for a while, but rather to recover. Turning to her maid Margot, Sarah asked how many days she had been unconscious after what had happened. Although she had been unconscious for several days, the lady did not feel rested and recovered slowly. It remained to be seen what kind of relationship Sarah had with her son, because despite the strained relationship with her husband, he still came to see her after the accident. But she hadn't heard anything about the boy until now. Turning to Margot, the girl asked if her son Carl was busy now. The maid was very surprised that the mistress wanted to meet her son. In the novel, Carl was completely incapable of understanding the feelings of others. Now he was much younger than he had been then. Sarah should definitely make the first move, but she was scared. She was going to meet the boy as soon as possible, and at the same time, find out how damaged their relationship was, since it would take a very long time to restore it. Sarah asked the maid to take her to the garden to see her son. Before Carl met the heroine, the garden was so beautiful. In the novel, it was covered in thorny vines to keep her from escaping. Finally, Sarah saw her son sitting and having breakfast in the garden. The lady began to be touched when she looked at her son and the pleasure with which he ate the sweets. The girl found this child incredibly charming. Card noticed that someone was watching him and immediately shouted out who was hiding behind the bushes. Since Sarah was exposed, she had to come out and greet her son. With a displeased face, Carl asked what she was doing there. The lady asked the boy if he would mind if she joined him in his tea party. Without answering, the boy stood up and was about to leave his mother's unpleasant company. Sarah wasn't going to let him get away from her. She lightly took Carl by the hand and asked him to wait. Looking tenderly into his eyes, the girl asked him to give her mother just a minute. You could tell from the look in this little boy's eyes that he didn't expect this from his mother. With a sharp movement of his hand, Carl pushed his mother away, shouting loudly that he didn't need her. With tears in his eyes, the boy ran away from Sarah. He tripped over a stone and fell to the ground, and the girl immediately rushed to him. Even though he was in pain, Carl screamed at his mother to get out. He knew that she was just trying to appear kind, but in reality it was all a lie. Sarah pretended not to hear this and tried to help her little son. Carl became even more angry and demanded that she leave immediately because he didn't need her. The baby's eyes were filled with tears from resentment and pain. By this time, servants had already arrived to help the baby get up and treat the wound. Sarah remained aside. That same evening, Sarah was restless. She kept thinking about the boy and his abrasion. She also realized that Carl hated his mother much more than she had imagined. Most likely, after this incident, the boy will not return to the kindergarten, believing that his mother took away his only place to rest. Carl must be very surprised by such unexpected changes in his mother. Sarah was going to figure out how to get closer to her son, but not so abruptly. After writing the letter, the girl called Margot to deliver it to Carl. The mistress confessed to her maid that she wanted to get closer to her son. Margot was genuinely happy for Sarah and promised to deliver the letter safe and sound. A few days later, when the boy woke up, he saw another gift. He didn't understand why his mother kept sending him this garbage. There was a teddy bear in the box, holding an envelope in its paws. In the letter, Sarah wrote that she asked the kitchen to prepare her son's favorite dessert and that he could rest peacefully in the garden, since she would not disturb him. There was also ointment for healing abrasions in the box. The boy could not understand what was happening to his mother, because just recently she said that her son irritated her. A servant entered the boy's room to make sure that Carl was awake. The man was surprised that the boy threw away all the gifts, but left the letter. The servant offered to help Carl get dressed, but the boy was independent and did not need help with such things. The boy looked at the bear, wondering what to do with it. The man suggested throwing it out again without the lady noticing. Carl decided to leave the teddy bear in the room and take the box to the trash. Noticing the servant's happy face, the boy explained that he kept the bear not because his mother gave it to him, but because he simply liked it. Carl had one more request for the man. Sarah's eyes sparkled with happiness. For the first time, her son sent her a letter back. After opening the envelope, the joy disappeared from the girl's face, and her son asked her not to send him anything else or write him letters. Margot tried to calm the lady down, but in fact, the girl did not expect success. The lady noticed that the letter was very beautifully written, and she was glad that Carl, at his age, was such a smart boy. She was still happy because it was the first time she had received a reply letter from her son. The maid was happy for her mistress, as she believed that Carl would certainly give his mother another chance. Margot was also glad to see her mistress's smile. Since her arrival, it was the first time she had seen her like that. The girl realized that in the Duke's house, she never even smiled or laughed. The heroes always had very gloomy faces. It was as if they were worried not about her, but about what she could do to them. Surprisingly, Sarah had no memories of the duchy. The lady wondered whether she should ask Margot about this. After a few seconds, she decided not to rush and to focus on her son. The maid suggested that Sarah go and see the young master in person. The lady wondered whether it was worth doing this if everything again did not go as she expected. Margot knew that Carl had been going to the garden a little earlier than usual lately. The girl remembered that she had promised her son not to bother him in the garden anymore. The maid was very persistent. She was sure that the young master would want to see his mother. Sarah pretended she had no choice, but she was unsure whether she should do it. She didn't even know what to say when they met her son. In the garden, she saw her son. As if nothing had happened, Sarah approached him and asked how his wound was. With a displeased face, the boy replied that she was fine. The lady noticed that Carl was anointing the wound with the ointment she had given him. She also noticed that the boy had come to the garden a long time ago, but still hadn't touched the desserts. She asked her son with hope in her voice if he was waiting for her. The boy replied that he was in no way waiting for his mother. Sarah began to justify herself by saying that she thought her son would not come to the kindergarten today, but Carl was here almost always. With a straight face, the boy said that there was no point in leaving his favorite place just because someone came there. With hope in her voice, Sarah asked if she could sit next to him, but received a negative answer. The lady did not give up. She asked if she could just look at her son then. The boy didn't answer, thus making it clear that he didn't mind. Sarah was very glad that, despite her presence, the young master still began to eat. A week later, the lady was sorting through the letters. Her heroine did not particularly participate in social life, but there was still no end to the invitations. Sarah copied and pasted a respectful refusal. She understood that there was no need for social events now. It would be better to look at Carl in the garden. There was one last envelope left, and the invitations were finished. Margot asked the lady for permission to ask her a question. The maid was surprised that Sarah had recently been trying to get closer to the young master. Margot suggested that in her diary, the lady was writing down observations about those who hated her. The girl was surprised by what she heard, because in her diary, she simply wrote down everything about Carl's cuteness. At this point, she closed the topic and thought about what she would write about today. Margot decided to continue the topic and suggested that the lady show everything she writes about her son to Carl himself. Sarah agreed to this idea with great enthusiasm. The maid thought that this was a great opportunity to communicate with the young master. It was a brilliant idea. The lady thanked Margot for this idea and went off somewhere. Sarah was very curious about what Carl's room looked like. She was sure that everything would be very cute since he was a child. The lady was sure that there would be a lot of toys in the room, which would make it seem even nicer. When she approached the door, she was incredibly afraid to even knock on it. Plucking up her courage, Sarah knocked on her son's door. Literally a second later, Carl asked who it was. Opening the doors, the boy saw his mother in front of him. He immediately tried to close the door and hide in the room, but she stopped him, saying that she would like to show him something. The little gentleman made a face and said that he was letting Sarah in only because he was in a good mood after the chocolate. Once in the room, the girl looked around and realized that she had expected to see something completely different. Having noticed the teddy bear that she gave to her son, the girl said that she was very glad that he treated this toy that way. A little confused, Carl began to hide the teddy bear, justifying himself by saying that he simply didn't want to throw it away. Returning to the purpose of his mother's visit, the boy asked what she wanted to show him. Opening her diary, the lady invited her son to read what he had written. A minute after reading it, Carl became angry and began asking with anger in his voice what it was. Out of anger, the boy found himself in the very center of a huge flame, which seriously scared Sarah. This was the skill of Duke Loperin in the novel. Only the one who inherited this skill can become the heir. The girl became incredibly happy that her son had this skill. It proved that she had a cool son. The boy felt awkward about what had happened and wanted to start making excuses, but his mother interrupted him, reassuring him that there was nothing wrong with it. Sarah thought that if Carl said he didn't like it, she would no longer write this diary. The lady did not understand how an innocent baby could grow into such a tyrant. She did not want to see how the boy harmed others and how he hurt the heroine. She decided that if Carl was loved and learned to love himself, then in the future he would also become different. Sarah decided that from now on, she would become a real mother for the young gentleman. Gently cupping his face in her hands, she asked him to devote at least 10 minutes a day to her. Carl sincerely did not understand his mother's request. The girl apologized to the boy for acting so late, but she was going to teach him something. Sarah was going to teach Carl how to treat someone with respect, to love and care for others, because no one had explained such important things to this child. With a false hope in his eyes, the boy agreed. Sarah was very happy about this chance and promised her son that she would not disappoint him. This child was incredibly wonderful. One thing was unclear: how he turned into a tyrant, depriving others of freedom. After all, it was all because no one cared about him, so he doesn't know what it's like to love and be loved. Sarah intended to raise Carl properly so that he would not grow up like in the original novel. While having a meal with her son, the girl wondered where she should start. She asked the child what he would do if he caught the beautiful bird. The boy thought for a moment, but after a minute he replied that it would be necessary to make a secure cage. Sarah took it as her son wanting to give the bird a house, and she thought it was adorable. In the end, Carl, with excitement in his eyes, added that if he liked the bird, he would close it so that it could not go anywhere. No matter how much the girl thought about it, it seemed that her son's inner villain was gradually revealing itself. The next time Sarah suggested that her son read a book, he agreed without thinking twice. The girl couldn't understand what her mistake was. Was the boy really like that from the very beginning? She smiled, looking at her son, but in her soul she wanted to burst into tears with all her might, not knowing what to do next. Things were worse than Sarah thought. She didn't know how to raise Carl. The lady was frightened by Margot, who screamed loudly in her ear, calling her. Noticing the mistress's bad mood, the maid assumed that she was worried about her master's imminent return. Sarah had completely forgotten about the tall, handsome man she had met on the first day of her rebirth. This man was Carl's father, and Sarah thought about taking the opportunity to bond with her son naturally with his father's help. To begin with, she decided to come up with a plan to bring her sweet son closer to his father. Margot reported that barring any force majeure, the Duke should return in 2 days. The maid knew it was a sad question, but she had to ask if her mistress would hide when her master returned. The girl did not understand what this question was about. Margot said that recently, the lady had been thinking a lot about the young master, thanks to which the mansion was once again bursting with life, and the maid was grateful for that. So the maid wanted to ask her mistress for a favor. She knew she had no right to ask for such a thing, but Margot only wanted Sarah to greet the gentleman properly, just once. Having heard the request, the lady realized how bad her heroine's relationship with her husband was. With a smile on her face, Sarah promised to greet the Duke. The maid did not expect her mistress to agree so quickly. She froze in her tracks. Sarah ordered that all the servants be warned that she was going to greet her husband as expected. She wasn't going to let the sweet little boy become a bloody tyrant. As soon as the happy maid left, Sarah got ready to finish her paperwork. The only thing she needed to remember was her husband's name. The Duke and his guards were returning home. Suddenly, he stopped abruptly. The Duke did not want to return home. It was all because of the lady. He decided to try knocking this time too, but he was sure that he would not find the lady in the mansion. Having arrived at the mansion, all the servants met their master on the street. He was very surprised that everyone was outside. The gentleman froze at what he saw. He couldn't believe his eyes. Standing in front of him was his wife Sarah in a charming dress. Looking the Duke in the eye, the lady said that she had been waiting for him. In confusion, the master ordered his guard to call the doctors as soon as they entered, as he thought he was delirious. But Sarah was real. The Duke could not believe that all this was not a hallucination. Sarah looked into his eyes and asked him to come home quickly, as there was a strong wind outside. The gentleman sensed something was wrong, so he asked the lady what she had in mind this time. The girl pretended not to hear this complaint, calling the Duke inside, citing the fact that he was tired from the journey. The Duke assumed that his wife had some kind of memory problem after the accident, since she was waiting for him for the first time in her life. Sarah insistently asked to follow her, saying that she had asked the cooks to prepare the food that the Duke liked. Walking through the corridors of the mansion, the Duke noticed that there was not a soul. This was the lady's plan, but she lied, saying that everyone was probably busy preparing and cleaning. During the conversation, Sarah laughed, and the Duke wondered if she really knew how to laugh. The gentleman put his arm around his wife and asked what they would do. Sarah's plan was to eat first. Walking into the dining room, the girl asked the gentleman to sit down. She was going to talk to him. This interested the Duke greatly, for Sarah was not one of those people who communicated simply without any benefit, and she hated him. The girl was angry because her husband sat and ate without saying a word, and yet she had been preparing for his arrival since early morning. She decided to take everything into her own hands, because if she missed this moment, the next one might not come. To begin with, she decided to gently nudge the conversation in the right direction. Sarah decided to ask if the Duke had had a hard time at work, since the journey was not short. The gentleman noticed that she had never been interested in his work or in him himself, much less. The girl began to make excuses, citing the fact that she was simply worried. With a smirk on his face, the Duke corrected her, as if she was not worried, but hoping that he would be hurt and never return. Sarah couldn't believe her ears. How could he think such a thing about her? The man noticed that his wife was doing something she usually never did. Sarah tried her best to hold on. After all, this was pretty much what she expected. The girl changed the subject, reminding them that they had a son together. She admitted that she wanted to talk about Charles, or rather, about his upbringing, suggesting that the Duke devote more time to the child. The Duke stood up abruptly from the table, clenching his fists in anger. He reminded that his wife had said that she hated him, and now she was offering to raise their son together. Sarah tried to approach the Duke to explain everything, but he took a step back and demanded that she not approach him. The girl tried to prove that she was not pretending, but her words against the master's words were worthless. It was the same with Carl. No matter how hard she tried, she was very hurt, because Sarah wanted to resolve the matter peacefully, but the Duke was very angry. Despite all this, the girl was not going to allow her son to grow up as a second-rate character. The Duke turned and headed towards the exit. Before Sarah could even finish, she started shouting after him to wait. When the girl rushed after her husband, she stumbled and began to fall. The Duke arrived in time to catch his wife. The girl began to cry, repeating that she knew he didn't like her, but for the sake of their son she was ready to do anything. He couldn't believe his ears. Sarah hadn't finished yet, but she couldn't speak because of the pain. Having brought his wife to her chambers, the Duke asked why she had fallen. Sarah explained with resentment in her voice that she had greeted him, and he had been rude to her in response, and had looked at her angrily during lunch. It was unlikely that anyone would like that. Her husband wasn't even nice, unlike their son, the girl thought. Looking at the Duke, Sarah asked if he really hated her that much. It was very strange for him to hear such a question, since he knew that his wife hated him with all her heart and soul. It was a surprise to Sarah that her heroine hated her husband, especially for no apparent reason. Taking his wife by the hand, the Duke began to tell her that as soon as he approached her, she began to scream and throw pillows. He pressed hard on her palm, causing her pain. It irritated him that Sarah was pretending not to remember anything. Realizing that he had hurt his wife, his expression immediately changed, noticing that her hands were cold. The Duke began to warm Sarah's hands, asking her to wait a little, even if she did not like it. The main thing is patience, as the doctor will arrive soon. The doctor arrived faster than the lady thought, and he immediately rushed to examine her. As soon as the doctor and the servants crossed the threshold of the room, the Duke immediately left it. Sarah started shouting after him to stop, because they hadn't even had a normal conversation. The girl caught herself thinking that it was impossible to make friends with the men in this mansion. The next day, the lady was still feeling ill. She kept thinking about her son, so that he would grow up in a happy family, but she didn't know how to get closer to her husband. The dinner alone was a failure. She didn't even want to try again. The girl also didn't know what to do. There was a knock on the door of the room. Sarah didn't like it, as she had asked Margot not to let anyone in. If the maid was unable to stop someone, then it was either her husband or her son. Sarah really hoped that this was her baby Carl. She guessed right, opening the door, and this beautiful baby stood in front of her. The lady was very happy that her son came to visit his mother. Carl heard from the maid that his mother had fainted. She just couldn't stand still because of how cute the boy was. The little boy handed his mother a candy, saying that when you are sick, you need to eat well. With a smile on her face, Sarah thanked her son for thinking of her. The boy replied, with a grin, that he had not come here for that reason, but simply because the maid had asked him to. Even if this was true, Sarah was still grateful to him. In any case, she was glad of his visit. The girl didn't understand why Carl was looking at her as if she had done something wrong. She asked him if he didn't like the fact that she stroked his head. Carl asked his mother not to touch him next time. The son decided to warn his mother that if she was so tired that she fainted, then it was better for her not to eat with her father. Sarah assumed the boy was worried about her, but Carl pretended he didn't care at all. The girl promised her son that once she got used to it, this would not happen again. With disbelief in his eyes, Carl asked her if it was true that she was trying so hard. Sarah confirmed this because they were her son and husband. The boy asked his mother if his father was more important to her than him. Before she could get an answer, Carl started shouting that she would now spend time with her father. With tears in his eyes, he left, shouting for her to run around with her father now, but without him. Realizing that her son could leave now, Sarah ran up to him, hugged him tightly, and said that for her mother, there was no one more important than her Carl. The girl confessed to the boy that for her there is nothing more important than time spent with her son. The boy hugged his mother tightly. Sarah clearly did not expect such a turn of events. He looked at her with such eyes, as if he was about to cry. Carl asked his mother to go and rest, because when you are sick, you need to sleep well. To have good dreams, the baby brought his mother a chocolate bear. Her heart was breaking for this beautiful baby. A couple of days later, based on reliable information from the chef, Sarah prepared a gift for her son. Despite the persuasion of the cook and his assistants, the lady personally prepared a surprise for her son. The girl really hoped that Carl would appreciate her gift. The boy, as usual, was in the garden. Upon seeing his mother, he immediately asked how she was feeling and if she was feeling better. With a smile on her face, Sarah replied that his advice had made her feel better and that she was very grateful for his time. The little gentleman came as he promised, thus keeping the promise he made to his mother. Turning to Margot, Sarah asked her for help. The girl brought a pie that she baked herself to try with her son. Carl's eyes lit up when he saw the walnuts. He wanted to grab the cake with his hands, but he knew that nobles were supposed to eat with forks. Margot came to the rescue. The girl said that the lady had been trying since the morning, so this pie can be eaten in any convenient way. Carl was delighted with this opportunity. The boy had just taken a bite of the pie when Sarah and the maid waited for his reaction to the pie. Without thinking twice, Carl said that it was disgusting. Trying not to show her upset look, the lady immediately began to think about what was wrong, whether there was not enough sugar or whether she had not baked the dough enough. Here, too, Margot came to the rescue, starting to justify Sarah, saying that the first time it didn't work out well, but Sarah would try. With wide eyes and a trembling voice, Carl asked if he understood correctly that this pie was baked by his mother. The girl began to smile stupidly, justifying herself by saying that she had been told that Carl liked this kind of thing, but she had never cooked before, so she must have made a mistake somewhere. After hearing this, the boy immediately began to stuff the entire piece of pie into himself. Sarah began to reassure him that she was not offended, and that there was no need to force herself to eat something she didn't like. Carl's mouth was smeared with pie, and with his mouth full, the boy declared that he wasn't forcing himself and that he really liked it. He asked Margot to give him another piece. The lady was sure that the pie tasted terrible, but the card could not be stopped. A look of genuine joy and gratitude appeared on her face, and she promised that she would try even better. After spending time with her son, Sarah walked down the hallway and thought about Carl's behavior. He said nice things and ate her pie with pleasure. For the sake of such a beautiful baby, she was obliged to get closer to her husband. Knocking on the Duke's door, she announced that his wife had arrived. The door was opened by Robert Moore, Duke Loperron's right-hand man. He informed the Duke that the lady had arrived. Without looking up from his work, the man asked what had happened. Sarah asked for a moment, as the servants had some problems, and she had come to ask for advice. With an imperturbable face, the Duke answered briefly that he was busy. Sarah didn't answer and didn't move from her spot. The Duke repeated that he had business to attend to and did not intend to talk to his wife. Putting on his well-practiced social smile, Robert said he had business to do and was about to leave the office. Looking menacingly at his assistant, Duke Loperron said that he had no business and would not go anywhere. Robert couldn't believe his ears because his master was so excited. Before the arrival of his mistress, he even prepared a chair for her, and now he was behaving incomprehensibly. Sarah did not back down. She suggested taking a walk in the garden, arguing that the Duke would sit there for hours doing paperwork. He repeated again that he was busy. Looking angrily at his wife, he demanded that she leave. Robert had no choice but to ask the lady to leave the office. Having softened the situation a little, the assistant said that the girl could come tomorrow morning. Sarah was so upset that she couldn't even hold back her tears. Everything was completely wrong, but maybe it was for the best, the girl thought. She decided not to give up and come up with a reason to come to her husband's office again. The next day, Sarah had nothing to do, and she decided to think about what kind of story she should read to her son. The lady's peace was disturbed by Margot, who brought a letter from the Marquise Penelope. The letter expressed gratitude for the lady's acceptance of the invitation to the birthday party of the Marquise's son. Sarah could not believe that she had answered wrong. The girl didn't know what to do, because it would look like she cared more about other people's children's birthdays than Carl's. It seemed that the ball was supposed to take place in 2 weeks. Sarah had already heard about this family somewhere. Finally, she remembered Ron Penzel's family. In the novel, he was the main character's assistant, and Carl killed him. Sarah now sat and consoled herself with the hope that her son would not hurt anyone again. She knew that everything was in her hands, and she would not allow her son to do this, but would raise him correctly. Sarah stood up abruptly and asked Margot to take her to her son. Robert informed the Duke that his wife was due to arrive soon, and his assistant could not believe that his master saw her every day. All this seemed very strange to the Duke, because after the accident, his wife was like a different person and stopped avoiding him. Before, she didn't even allow anyone to touch her. After a while, she stopped even looking in her husband's direction. He just wanted Sarah to smile at him at least once in the morning. The girl was always cold. The Duke thought he would never see her smile again. Now everything had changed. She brought him tea, offering to have a snack together. She suggested patrolling the area together. She expressed a desire to eat some pie together and talk at the same time. The Duke hoped that his wife would smile when she arrived today, although it was unlikely. The gentleman's thoughts were interrupted by Robert, who thought that the Duke was working too much. The assistant also noticed that Sarah was late, suggesting that the gentleman go and find out everything. The man suddenly stood up from his chair and said that he was going to go for a walk, since he could waste away in this office. Robert tried to stop him, pointing to a whole pile of documents. Looking at his assistant, the Duke reminded him that it was he who should help him. Robert only shouted after the gentleman that if he was after his wife, she was usually in the garden. The man pretended not to understand what his assistant was talking about. Walking down the corridor, the Duke heard his son's voice, Sarah tried to prove to her son that she was not lying. Carl knew that his mother always came to his father first, even though she told him that he was the most important to her. The boy asked his mother if she liked being with the Duke. The gentleman certainly didn't expect to hear such a conversation, but he became very interested. He felt ashamed of himself, stood at the door, and eavesdropped. The Duke had had a feeling in his heart for so long about his wife Sarah. He heard the girl explain to her son that he was much more precious to her. Taking Carl by the hands, Mom began to explain that this was why she'd come to him first, to find out if he wanted to play with the son of the Marquis of Penzl. The boy looked at his mother with distrust. The lady said that she had been invited there to a party in honor of a child's birthday and invited Carl to go with her. The boy was silent for a second, but then asked if he needed to bring a gift. Sarah didn't quite understand the question, but explained to her son that it would be better if she brought the gift. Tears flowed like a river from Carl's eyes. He pushed his mother away, shouting that she had never given him anything. Sarah realized her mistake. She shouldn't have talked about the gift, because her heroine never celebrated her son's birthday. The boy continued to scream in pain, saying that nothing would get better between them, and that he would be in pain again, just like before. Just recently, her heroine ordered Carl not to call her mom. She was even disgusted by the voice of her own son. Sarah was suddenly struck by a headache, and the heroine's memories came flooding back. Carl started screaming that he didn't need his mother and didn't need anyone at all. He didn't trust Sarah anymore. The baby spent his birthday in tears because his mother didn't care. He begged her to congratulate him just once. Sarah only demanded that her son stop acting like a child. It was very painful for Carl because he was left all alone and on his birthday, rejected by his mother. It was just a fragment of her character's memories, but Sarah was in so much pain. She was very sorry that she had not had the opportunity to console her son back then. She hugged Carl very tightly and began to beg him to forgive her. Even though it wasn't her, Sarah still couldn't forgive herself. The boy just screamed that he hated his mother. It was a terribly pitiful sight. Sarah asked for forgiveness for leaving her boy alone, for not being able to help, for not knowing how to love. Looking at him, she promised that this would never happen again, that she would give him the truest love that no one else would give. Despite the fact that Carl insisted that he hated his mother, Sarah repeated her words of love for her child with all sincerity. The girl suggested throwing a grand banquet in honor of Carl's birthday. She began to imagine how many people would come to congratulate the baby, and there would be a huge cake and lots of sweets that he loves so much. The boy didn't care anymore, but Sarah didn't stop trying to find out what he wanted. She began to assume that it must be something cute. All the baby wanted was to be congratulated. Whenever Sarah remembered Carl's past, tears immediately welled up in her eyes. The girl promised to do everything in the best possible way, but the problem was that the birthday was not soon. Carl wished to be congratulated before others. Sarah immediately asked her son to devote some time to her tomorrow. She came up with the idea of throwing a party tomorrow in her son's favorite garden. The baby liked this very much, and he hugged his mother tenderly. The Duke was outside the door all this time. He heard the entire dialogue. The man decided that tomorrow would be a long day. The next day, while walking in the garden, the gentleman discovered that it was very noisy. When he reached the gazebo, he saw his wife and servants congratulating little Carl. Sarah dressed her son in a cute suit. The birthday wishes just kept pouring in. Carl was delighted to blow out the candle on his first birthday cake. At that moment, Sarah had a strange feeling, as if they were being watched. It really was like that. She decided to step away for a moment, while Carl's attention was elsewhere. Approaching the Duke, the lady asked why he had come here. Holding back his laughter, the man asked what they were doing in the gazebo. The girl said that Carl doesn't like many people, so she decided to spend his birthday here. The Duke still did not understand why his wife continued to do something she had never done before. This behavior of the gentleman was strange. Today he was generous with questions. Sarah couldn't answer anything, except that Carl was a very sweet boy. The Duke reminded his wife that she had left her son with the nanny because she found it disgusting even to touch him. Although the girl sometimes saw Sarah's memories, she did not feel the emotions that the heroine experienced. The Duke stated that his wife really does communicate like a different person, and now he doesn't even think that she is pretending. Sarah said that she had changed, which meant they should raise their son together. The man also noticed that she called her son by name, but he was still a Duke to her. He was sure that his wife didn't even remember his name. It was true that Sarah asked Margot the Duke's name, but she never used it because there was no need, so she forgot it. In a rough voice, the Duke demanded that his wife state his name. Sarah said the first thing that came to her mind, calling him Kian. The Duke was a little confused, since his wife called him by his shortened name, and so tenderly. She didn't remember her full name, so she had to make do. Usually, it was Sarah who put up a barrier in their relationship, but this was different. Had she really changed? The Duke wondered. In the end, the gentleman told Sarah to call him whatever she wanted. And since he had finished work, it was time for him to go. He walked away quickly. At that moment, Sarah's son was heading towards her. Carl asked to tell what his mother had told his father. The girl realized that her son probably wanted his dad to congratulate him, but she missed it. Sarah again began to ask her son for forgiveness. Carl concluded that his father was angry because his mother did not invite him to the birthday party. The girl had to lie that her father had come to congratulate his son on his birthday, but was so busy that he had only stopped by for a minute. Sarah reminded her son that the party was still in full swing. Taking his mother by the hand, Carl went to show her the cake they had made. The girl didn't know what to do when the boy was so cute. The cake was prepared under the careful guidance of Sarah. Although she did not make it herself, she chose the ingredients carefully. With hope in his eyes, the boy asked his mother if she would congratulate him next time. The girl promised, of course, not to forget, because it was the day her dear son was born. This party was for the missed times. Sarah promised that the next one would be even more fun. This child looked at her with great hope in his eyes. A wave of terrible sadness suddenly washed over Sarah. There was a great pain in her chest. Words from her memories floated into her head, but she couldn't understand what it all meant. Finding tears in his mother's eyes, Carl immediately offered her sweets, as they made him feel better. He handed his mother a piece of cake so that she could try it. The girl happily ate the piece given to her by her son. The cake was truly delicious. It was all very strange. Sarah thought that memories shouldn't make it so hard for her when she was so happy. A couple of days later, Sarah breathed a sigh of relief once she had finished her work. Margot hoped that the lady would go to the Duke, but she obviously had other plans. Without even looking up at his mother, Carl asked why she had come, since he doesn't communicate with those who don't keep their promises. Once again, he forgave her, reminding her that he should be more important to her than anyone else. Sarah hugged her son tenderly, saying that there was no one more important to her than him. A few minutes later, the girl was already in her husband's office with tea. Today, no one drove her away, but the Duke really had a lot of work. He didn't have time to talk, but he allowed his wife to just sit in the office, and now he promised not to forbid her from coming to him. He asked again if he remembered correctly that his wife had called him Kian. Since she called him so affectionately, the Duke assumed that Sarah would now come to him first. This question made the girl hysterical. She didn't know how to deal with both of them at the same time. Margot had a solution to this. Sarah was already overjoyed. She couldn't wait to hear the solution to this situation. Everything was perfect in theory, but things didn't go as Sarah planned. The lady shared with Margot her idea of getting closer to both the Duke and her son. In that case, the maid suggested that they all meet together, assuming that everyone would like it. It would be wonderful to do this over tea. Anyway, Sarah often visits her husband lately. Sarah immediately agreed, because when she is alone, she always feels awkward. But with Carl, it will certainly be fun. Having done so, the girl came to the Duke with her son. But silence reigned in the office. Carl turned his attention to his mother, who wanted to somehow start a dialogue, and with a serious face, asked what she needed. The Duke immediately picked up on it, thinking that his wife needed something. The girl broke into a stupid smile, making excuses. With a stern look, the Duke reminded him that he had asked his wife to call him Kian. Putting her arm around her son's shoulders, Sarah said she just wanted to call Carl. The boy did not understand what his mother wanted. She reminded her son that in a few days they were going to a birthday party together. Looking at his father, Carl said that he remembered that he was going there only with his mother. Trying to distance herself from this dialogue, Kian pretended to be engrossed in her work. Sarah asked the baby to promise her something before that. Looking at his mother with his huge eyes, Carl froze in bewilderment. The current Carl was unlikely to harm Ron, but Sarah decided to make sure anyway. She explained that the boy's birthday was the same age as Carl's, and she would really like them to get along. The kid didn't see the need for it. Looking at her son, Sarah asked if he had forgotten what his mother had told him. Carl began to shout that he remembered everything his mother had said. The girl taught her son that when meeting someone, he should not be rude or ignore them just because he doesn't like them. Sarah happily patted her son on the head. She really wanted her son to make friends and have fun with them. The mother and son sealed their agreement with their little fingers. Sarah was happy that she had such an obedient child. Kian's documents suddenly flew into the air, and the Duke himself sat there looking somewhat dejected. Sarah asked Carl to wait a little. Approaching her husband, the girl asked if everything was okay with him, or if he could call a doctor. Taking his wife's hand, Kian replied that there was no need for that. Looking into Sarah's eyes, the Duke asked if his son was really that good. The girl did not understand the question, because the answer was obvious, especially since this was their common son. Kian's gaze softened, and he looked at Carl without taking his eyes off him. The boy smiled shyly, saying that he was good. Sarah felt like she had won a little, and Carl was pleased with even the smallest gestures of care. The girl remembered that just recently, these two didn't even want to look at her when she was reborn. The Duke and his son noticed that Sarah was smiling strangely, and the girl joked that she was just having fun. She suggested that Keanu take a break and have some tea. This time, the Duke immediately agreed. Sarah was very happy with her job, but the same could not be said about the baby. A few days later, the lady and her son went to Ron Penzel's birthday party. Carl tugged at his mother's dress and showed that his ribbon had come undone. While Sarah was helping her son tie a ribbon, she didn't notice Kian approaching. The Duke asked if they were leaving yet. The girl really hoped that he would not go with them, but simply came to wish them good luck before leaving. The Duke lied when he said he needed to go to headquarters, so he left. Carl was impatient to go and urged his mother to hurry. Robert intervened in the conversation, saying that he and the Duke were going the same way so they could go in the same carriage. Carl was against this proposal. He never intended to ride in the same carriage with his father. The Duke, on the contrary, did not object at all. Sarah tried to smooth things over by hinting that they would be cramped in such a small carriage. The baby demanded that his father go in another carriage. Kian did not back down. He said that there was enough room for him in this carriage. Sarah's husband and son were acting very strange today, and she didn't know why. Finally, she realized that Kian wanted to get to know his son better, which is why he insisted on going on a trip together, and the baby was simply shy. Since the Duke was trying so hard, the girl decided to help them. She said that she would ask for a separate carriage to be prepared for her, and that father and son would travel together. Having locked himself in the carriage, Carl declared that he was fine alone. The Duke turned around and went into the mansion, supposedly remembering that he still had business here. Sarah clearly did something wrong. She couldn't leave her son alone, so she went with him. The girl tried to change the subject and asked Carl if he was nervous, since this would be his first dinner party. The boy clearly wasn't particularly nervous. Sarah realized that her son was not thinking about the dinner party, but about the situation that had happened. She decided to say that she knew that Marquise Penzel served very tasty desserts. The girl hit the nail on the head, and this really enlivened Carl. She knew that her son liked walnut cakes, so she asked him to make them. The little boy's eyes lit up as soon as he heard about walnut cake. Carl was too smart for his age. This little guy was not easy to lure with food. Sarah wanted to make her son's favorite cake since she failed last time. The baby looked into his mother's eyes and said that the cake was very tasty. The girl understood that Carl was lying, but nevertheless, he ate the whole cake. Sarah couldn't help but laugh. This baby was too cute. She really hoped that her son would make friends with someone at the party. The carriage drove up to the mansion of the Marquis Penzel. Seeing the unusual carriage, the ladies immediately realized that the Duchess of L'Operan had arrived. The maids greeted the little gentleman and the Duchess herself. Carl extended his hand to his mother to help her down from the carriage. With such a companion, Sarah felt like a queen. The butler invited the guests to go into the garden. There was a large cake on the table, but Carl noticed that the cake for his birthday was bigger. Sarah noticed how her son tried so sweetly to hide his interest. The Duchess was met by the wife of the Marquis of Penzel. She was glad that Sarah accepted her invitation, although she did not expect it. The girl thanked Mrs. Penzel for the invitation to the banquet. Noticing that the Duchess had not arrived alone, the lady was delighted, since Ron had no friends, and she would very much like the boy to make friends with someone. Although Carl looked unhappy, he was actually glad to be here. Sarah expressed a desire to meet the son of the Marquise Penzel. There were projectors in the garden, so guests could see Ron's sweetest moments. Sarah was very surprised that projectors exist in this world. She immediately wanted a camera to film her beloved son. Without waiting, the girl asked the Marquise where to purchase such equipment. Holding a small flame in his palm, Carl categorically forbade his mother to take it off. The girl was upset because she would have to capture her son only in memory. The party was still for children, and their mothers sat separately, where the Duchess was invited. Carl grabbed his mother by the dress, and his eyes showed concern that she was about to leave. Sarah reassured her son by promising that they would only be separated for a short time. Seeing the surprise in the eyes of the Marchioness Penzel, the Duchess explained that this was Carl's first meeting with his peers, since she did not often attend such events. The Marchioness expressed hope that they would now see each other more often, as this was an excellent opportunity to talk about children. The lady introduced the Duchess of L'Operan to the ladies. Sarah was clearly not very welcome, since everyone had only heard about her, but no one had ever seen her. To somehow diffuse the situation, the Marchioness invited her guest to try their delicious cookies. The girls clearly found a common language, which the other ladies did not like. Since everything was in place, one of the ladies decided to ask a question. She started by saying that she recently got herself a dog. Keeping dogs was not a cheap business. At the end of her story, this unpleasant person asked what to do with dogs that do not obey their owners. The question was addressed personally to Mrs. L'Operan, and there was terrible surprise on Sarah's face. In that case, the Duchess suggested training the dog better. The ladies clearly disagreed with her, believing that there was no point in keeping disobedient animals, and that it was better to throw them out into the street. The ill-mannered people began to mock, hinting that the little dog was traveling on the road and didn't know his place, but at the same time, he looked very good. They also hinted that this little dog had forgotten why she was sold. Did they really talk about Sarah? And also mentioned the owner. Supposedly, he is a foreigner. The Duchess assumed that Kian was a foreigner. In the end, the lady thanked Sarah for sharing her opinion, adding that her dog was quite stupid, but she would try to train it. The Duchess could not believe her ears what this woman was allowing herself to do. They said that high society was a battlefield, but Sarah had gotten herself into a strange battle. She really wanted to see Carl, to see if he was having fun there. It turned out that this was not all. The unpleasant person remembered that Madame L'Operan was going to invite guests to the mansion. She clarified whether this was true. Sarah smiled and confirmed. The lady did not think that the Duchess would be allowed to do this because she could not go against the Duke. Sarah assured her mistress that her worries were unnecessary, since the Duke did not forbid her to invite guests. Marquise Penzel turned her attention to herself. deciding to share her opinion on the previous topic. She had a beautiful parrot, but sometimes it said strange and incomprehensible things. The parrot was rude and rude. Unfortunately, the Marquise could not do anything about it, since it was a bird, not a person. You can't cut out a bird's tongue, because it doesn't understand what it's saying anyway, the Marquis concluded. So, the lady asked her guests to avoid rudeness and boorishness in the future. This request, and the way the Marquise Penzel presented it, simply infuriated the ladies of the court. One of them jumped up and walked away, saying that she remembered that she had forgotten to do something. The other two also followed her, citing some fictitious business. The Marquise only laughed, ironically saying that she was sorry. Now her appetite had returned. She offered the Duchess some more cookies with a grin. Now the cookies really were sweeter. Meanwhile, while the mothers were enjoying the cookies, the children were playing. But only Carl was sitting alone by himself. The baby enjoyed the walnut cake. Mr. Penzel noticed that his guest was sitting all alone. Having asked to stop the game, he went to Carl. Approaching him, he asked with a kind look if the food was tasty. Carl remembered that his mother asked him to make friends and have fun. He was afraid that if he did not keep his promise, she would hate him. The kid offered a piece of his pie to the birthday boy. Little Penzel realized that his guest did not know who he was. Carl got a hint when he learned that the cake was made by his interlocutor's pastry chef. He immediately realized that standing before him was Ron Penzel, the hero of the occasion. Looking at his guest, Ron asked if he was jealous of him. Carl didn't envy his new acquaintance in the least. For some reason, this surprised little Penzel. Carl got off his chair and asked Ron why he came up to him when they were already having fun. The birthday boy thought that Carl looked more interesting than them, and leaving him alone was very rude. The boy began to boast that his mother always praised him, asking his guest if his mother praised him. Carl replied that his mother praised him non-stop. To some extent, he was not lying. An argument began to break out between the kids about who their mother praised more often. Their argument was interrupted by a plump little boy with red hair. Turning to Ron, he said that he thought that he had abandoned them for someone important, and he was only playing with this child. Little Penzel reminded that he has the right to choose who to play with and be friends with. The red-haired man began to shout that Ron knew nothing at all, and that his interlocutor was a savage scum, and that barbarian blood flowed in his veins. His mother, who was as ill-mannered as he was, told him that if he went near Carl, he would be cursed for life. Stretching his hand toward the impudent man, Carl asked if he could answer for his words. The stranger was not one to be easily timid. Charles remembered Robert's words, that he was a member of one of the most noble families of the empire, above which only the family of His Majesty, and in order to match his status, he studied manners. Little Loperin thought that when the stranger grew up, he would be afraid to even raise his head in his presence, and all this was just empty chatter. Finally, as calmly as possible, Carl replied that he was well aware of all the rumors, and the impudent fellow was apparently not smart enough to watch his language in the presence of the future duke. What he heard made him angry. For a second, Carl regretted mentioning his father. He wasn't going to do anything anyway. Besides, he promised his mother that he would get along with the kids. Ron's mom taught him that bullying your friends over rumors was bad, really bad. This childish conflict was interrupted by a lady who called very loudly for her ill-mannered son as they were leaving. Carl told Ron that his mother asked him to make friends with children his own age. Marquise Penzel shared with Sarah that when she communicates with her son, she loses track of time. Sarah felt the same way when she spent time with Carl. The days flew by. Marquise Penzel could not have imagined that she and Sarah were so similar. She asked Mrs. Loperin how she usually spent time with her son. At that moment, Sarah's head began to spin. Memories from the past came to mind, of some man shouting at her in rage as a little girl that the least she should do was to appear in high society and pretend that she knew. This unknown person also stated that the girl has nothing but a pretty face. Sarah felt very bad, although the memory just seemed and disappeared. she assumed that it was her heroine's father. Marquise Penzel immediately came to the rescue, seeing that her guest was not well. The Duchess lied when she said she was just wondering if her son was doing well. In that case, the girl suggested going and visiting the children. Sarah happily agreed. The Duchess really hoped that her son had not fought with anyone during this time. She believed him, but she still read the novel, by which time his abilities had already manifested themselves. As Sarah approached the children's area, she realized that something had happened. After the Duchess heard her son crying, her heart seemed to stop. Seeing this unpleasant person and her son, the girl began to guess who was behind this. She immediately began to call Carl. With tears in his eyes, he rushed to his mother. The baby hugged his mother tightly. Sarah tried to calm him down as quickly as possible. When the tears stopped flowing from Carl's eyes, she asked what had happened. The girl was very angry that someone dared to offend her child. Seeing a face that was already familiar to her, Sarah immediately guessed what was going on. She demanded an explanation from Mrs. Charity. This unpleasant lady began to mumble something to herself. She immediately began to justify her son, saying that he had made a small mistake. Sarah was furious that her son was crying because of a small mistake. Madame Charity did not know what to say. She was all sweating from excitement and fear. Little Penzel intervened in the conversation, wanting to tell everything. The Marchioness reminded her son that she had told him more than once not to associate with ignoramuses because he was a member of a noble family. The Marquise Penzel began to ask forgiveness from Madame L'Opéran for allowing such unpleasant things to happen at the tea party. She understood perfectly well that such a thing was simply unacceptable. Sarah asked the Marquise not to apologize for the behavior of others. The only thing the Duchess wanted to know was why her son was crying. Turning to Mrs. Charity, Sarah sternly said that she was not patient herself, so she was waiting for an explanation. This lady had to tell that her son called Charles a descendant of a barbarian, and thereby insulted the entire family of the Duke. At that very moment, she began to justify her son by saying that he was just a child. The Duchess thought there was no excuse for this. Their house was constantly portrayed in an unflattering light, so this boy had most likely heard a lot of gossip. Carl added that his offender said that if he approached him, he would be cursed. Madame Charity tried to turn the situation into a peaceful direction, citing that she had already punished her son, and that today was such a good day. Sarah was very angry. She witnessed this woman hit her son. She ordered her to apologize to her son for daring to raise her hand against him. Then, Madame Charity grabbed her son by the hair and started yelling at him to apologize to Carl. Without waiting for the child's reaction, she swung at him with all her might. Sarah started screaming to stop this crazy woman. Putting on a sweet voice, Madame Charity apologized for her son's behavior, saying that she didn't even know who he had heard such things from. Trying to reach out to Carl, Sarah screamed loudly for her to move away from them. The Duchess was furious that Madame Charity was going to touch Charles with the same hands that had hit her child. Sarah promised to tell her husband about this personally. The lady began to beg the Duchess to wait. Tears flowed from the eyes of Carl's offender. Sarah felt very sorry for the boy. Technically, he was not guilty of anything. Children are not toys, but people, Ms. L'Opéran said. She believed that there was no forgiveness for such a thing. Hugging their son tightly, they headed to the carriage to go home. Sarah decided that upon her return, the first thing she would do would be to go to Keanu, since this was not only an insult to her husband, but to their entire family. The girl asked her son for forgiveness for the fact that they had to leave so abruptly. Carl began to say that he had behaved well, had not quarreled with anyone, and had kept his promise. Taking his mother's hand, he asked her not to leave him. Sarah hugged her son tightly and asked him why he thought she would leave him. It was always like this in Carl's life. The Duchess understood what he was afraid of. Only 2 months had passed since they had made peace. Sarah still didn't understand why her heroine was so cold towards her son. Whenever Carl said something like that, her heart would break into tiny pieces, as if he really was her son, and not just the main character in a novel she had read. Once again, Sarah promised that she would always be there. The kid hated it when adults lied, so he asked them to keep their promise. The Duchess was proud of her son. In that situation, he did everything right and behaved bravely. For this, she promised to fulfill one of his wishes. Carl's eyes lit up. He asked to read him a bedtime story. The thing is that one boy boasted that his mother reads him fairy tales before bed. Sarah wondered who they were talking about. Carl explained that he meant Ron, the boy he had befriended. This news made the girl very happy. She asked her son to introduce her to him next time. Sarah also promised to prepare a place for the boys where they could play peacefully. For some reason, Carl didn't really want to meet him, but if there was a walnut cake, he was ready. The girl agreed to this, saying that she would ask the kitchen to prepare it, especially for her son. The Duchess and her son returned home at sunset. It had been a long day. Summer was just around the corner. Sarah suggested to Carl that they go boating when it got warmer. The boy was surprised by this proposal. In her dreams, she went boating with Keen and her son, so she suggested to her son that he make it happen. When Carl heard about his father, he was a little upset. Sarah began to explain that Dad loved his son just as much as she did. If his mother promised never to abandon Carl, then he wouldn't mind. The girl explained that she was trying only for the sake of her beloved son. The next morning, Sarah sat and wondered what Lady Cherty had meant at that dinner. Was her heroine really forced to marry Kian? And why was he called a barbarian? She also did not understand why the mother left her son alone and why the husband believed that his own wife hated him. The rules of etiquette and the norms of society seemed to have been with Sarah from the moment she arrived here. But she remembered nothing about her family. Something was wrong here. She had to remember what she had forgotten. The girl called her maid Margot. She asked her if there were any prejudices about foreigners in the empire. The cup of tea fell from the maid's hands, her eyes wide open at what she heard. Margot asked the lady why she suddenly became interested in this. Sarah explained that something unpleasant had happened at the meeting with the Marquise Penzel. Countess Cherty's son said that Carl had savage blood in him, and that if her child came near him, he would be cursed. What she heard greatly outraged the maid. Sarah also said that her memory is still returning after the accident. With sadness in her eyes, Margot understood why, in that case, the Duchess liked the young gentleman. The girl immediately began to assure the maid that when her memory returned, nothing would change. Sarah loved her son very much, believing that there was no kinder and sweeter child in the world. Margot understood her mistress perfectly, but advised her not to tell the Duke about the problem. The maid didn't know what happened between Sarah and Kian, but there had to be a reason for this memory loss. The Duchess has changed a lot since the accident, and if her husband finds out that she is so kind because she doesn't remember anything, then the gentleman may withdraw into himself, and his feelings may cool. Margot believed that when the memories returned, Keanu would not have to feel the pain of seeing his wife unresponsive. Sarah couldn't believe that her husband didn't hate her, because she was sure that he did. The maid said that if this were so, the Duke would not have spent a huge amount of money on their wedding. The girl learned that Kian had proposed to her in order to rekindle the flame of nobility in her fading house. Regarding the situation with Madame Cherty, Margot promised to contact the Marquise Penzel and find out the details, and then pass them on to the gentleman. Sarah wanted to do it herself. Margot stopped her because she knew that the Duke would notice this, because his wife was always squeamish when talking about foreigners. It would be strange if she suddenly began to take an interest in them. Sarah suggested that her character had some negative experience with foreigners. Margot assured that Madame Cherty would not go unpunished, since she had insulted the only heir and the entire duchy. Sarah asked the maid to tell her all the details later. The husband, who at first glance avoided her, actually cared. Her heroine's family loved the girl, but then why was she so rude? Sarah really wanted to remember and understand everything. A week later, the weather had already changed significantly, and it was hot in the mansion. Margot came to the lady with good news. High society was closed to Countess Cherty. She was no longer a countess, and would not be able to attend any meetings. During the investigation, it turned out that the Countess had an affair with a knight of her house, Margot said. Sarah had already heard about this from the Marchioness Penzel, but did not attach much importance to it. Moreover, it turned out that her son was not even the Count's son. The woman was thrown out without a penny in her pocket. Sarah didn't want such a cruel punishment, but apparently that was the influence of karma. Changing the subject, the girl asked where her son was. The baby was in the library because it was getting hotter and the garden was uncomfortable. The girl really wanted to see Carl. She asked Margot to prepare some cold desserts for him. As Sarah entered the library, she noticed that it was eerily quiet. She found her son sleeping. Most likely the baby fell asleep while reading books. The girl began to wake up Carl, saying that this was not the place for a son, that the bedroom was for that. Touching the boy's forehead, Sarah realized that he had a fever, as if he was about to cook from the inside. She became scared because a cooling spell had been cast on the library. The girl grabbed her son in her arms and ran to look for help. Carl's head hurt terribly. The baby howled in pain. The healer said that it would pass in a couple of days, but it was painful for the boy because he was growing. The man reassured Sarah that her son had no health problems and there was nothing to worry about. The Duchess couldn't believe that the heat was also due to growth, since Carl's body was like boiling magma. The little gentleman's innate ability was fire. When his strength reached a certain threshold and the body could not withstand it, the baby became worse. First aid had been given, so now Carl needed to rest. Margot promised Sarah to keep an eye on the young gentleman's condition, sending her to rest in her room. The Duchess thanked the maid for her care, but still she could not rest peacefully unless she took care of her son herself. She asked Margot to leave her alone with Carl. In his sleep, the baby was still moaning in pain. Tears were streaming from his eyes. He felt pain and heat. Opening his eyes, Carl saw his mother in front of him. Sarah couldn't believe her ears, because it was the first time her son called her mom. The girl calmed the child down, saying that she was nearby. Carl immediately jumped up and began to apologize for acting like a child, begging his mother not to hate him. Sarah hugged her son tightly. She didn't understand how she could hate him. She admitted that she was very glad that her son called her mom, telling him that he can behave as he pleases, because he is a child. The boy burst into tears of happiness even more. The Duchess laid her son on the pillow. He needed as much rest as possible to get back to normal. Sarah promised Carl that when he got better, they would go boating and have fun. The baby asked his mother to read him a story again until he fell asleep. With great joy, the girl took the book and began to read. Having finished reading the story, Carl fell asleep. The silence in the room was interrupted by Kian's voice, who came unexpectedly and asked his wife why she was not in bed yet. He scared her very much by not answering her question. Sarah asked him why he wasn't sleeping, since he had been working all day and was probably tired. Touching his son's forehead, Kian made sure that the fever was subsiding. The girl was already glad that her father was worried about his son, but the Duke said that since Carl was the heir, he should be sure that everything was fine with him. Sarah realized that he was lying. The Duke was tired from working late, but he himself came to his son. The girl said that she would stay with her son all night. The Duke didn't like this idea. He decided that his wife was up to something. If she is the one he knows, this was all very strange for Kian. Sarah tried to convince him that she had changed, but the Duke stood his ground, believing that people do not change with the snap of a finger. He had this opinion because he was sure that his wife hated him and Carl. The Duchess replied that it had once been so, but now she loved her husband and son, especially her son. Looking Sarah in the eye, Kian said that this meant that this was why she got angry at Countess Cherty when she insulted Carl. The Duke extended his hand to his wife, asking her to take it. Sarah noticed that his hands were shaking violently. It was all very strange. Just recently, the girl was disgusted to touch her husband, and now she calls him by name and even holds his hand. Looking closely at Sarah, Kian asked if she had lost her memory in the accident. If the wife had lost all her memories, That would explain everything, which is why it was so easy and pleasant to be with her now, the Duke said. The girl pursed her lips in fear. Everything was going so well, and then she screwed up. If this hadn't happened, Kian would never have found out. He wouldn't know how happy he could be when Sarah didn't hate him. The Duke hugged his wife tightly. He whispered in her ear that he fell in love with her smile, bright as a ray of sunshine. Kian fell in love with the sound of her timid whispers, her gentle voice, and everything about Sarah. The Duke was sure that when his wife's memories returned, they would no longer be able to be close. But for now, he asked to be allowed to be selfish. Looking at his sincere gaze, Sarah replied that if he really wanted this, then she was powerless to stop him. She knew that her husband was a kind and loving man. Now she knew that all his rudeness was due to shyness. Sarah asked Kian if he was afraid that she would turn away from him when the memories returned, that she would be angry, and her gaze would be cold, and that it would hurt him. The girl promised that even if her memories returned, she would not forget this warmth. Kian asked where she got this sensuality from. If she continues to speak so softly, he will not be able to accept the fact that sooner or later his wife will change. She was too cute now. With a grin on her face, Sarah asked if this was really the same man who hadn't even looked at her at lunch. He thought that she would forget about it. But no, because at that moment, the girl thought that he was making fun of her. Kian had waited so long for his wife to smile. Taking his hand gently, Sarah asked, even though she was so cold and rude, if he still loved her. Yes, of course he loved her. Even if Sarah was colder than snow and rougher than stone, he didn't care. Her smile would always warm his soul. The girl blushed in a second from such romance. Kian ran his fingers gently over her face. I smelled the scent of her hair again. Sarah was very ashamed of her feelings. The Duke was so handsome today that it was enough to drive one crazy. He was too close to her. Noticing her flushed face, Kian asked if she was embarrassed. Sarah insistently asked him to move away. She reminded the Duke that he had come here to visit his son. Kian confirmed this, adding that he came for her sake as well. The girl asked incredulously why this suddenly happened, since he was usually not so kind. Sarah reminded that whenever she came to him, he didn't even look in her direction, but was supposedly busy. Kian fell to his knees in front of his wife and began to justify himself by saying that he really loved it when she came. The Duke knew that Sarah could not sit in the office forever, but would leave and perhaps never return. But he wanted to enjoy her beauty entirely. He was very scared, imagining the day when the girl would start looking at him with disgust again. Looking into her eyes, Kian promised to always love her. His words sounded incredibly sincere. Sarah was so embarrassed that she couldn't say a word. First, she needed to calm down. She decided to kick him out, citing the fact that she needed to look after Carl. The Duke suggested that they do this together. Sarah really needed Carl's help now. It seemed to her that her heart would stop from excitement. At that moment, the boy began to moan in his sleep again. The girl immediately approached him and began to touch his forehead. The baby said he felt dizzy and probably had a fever. She applied a compressor to him to at least somehow alleviate the pain. Seeing his dad in front of him, Carl said that his mom was enough for him here. Sarah apologized to her husband, but asked him to leave them alone with their son. The Duke was very keen to stay, as he knew how to help with this disease, having suffered from the same thing as a child. Without letting his father finish speaking, Carl began shouting that it was very noisy in the room. This little sly one began to imagine that Dad was so noisy and that his ears were ringing as if his head was about to burst. Kian clearly didn't expect such dirty tricks from his heir. She once again asked her husband to leave, as her son needed peace. The Duke had no choice but to surrender and leave. The next day, Sarah couldn't concentrate at all. Margot saw that her mistress was exhausted and insisted that she go to bed. The Duchess refused, as she had not yet finished her work. But the maid tried to convince her that sitting all night with the young master was work. In the early morning, Sarah had to go to her office to work, so now she was worried about her son's condition. Margot happily announced that Carl's appetite had returned, and he had a very hearty lunch, and it seemed that his strength was returning. Someone knocked on the office door. Sarah immediately assumed that it was Kian, and he had come to see her. Fortunately, she was mistaken, and a young gentleman came to see her. The girl immediately rushed to her son to check his condition, because he had not yet fully recovered, but was already walking around the mansion. Looking into his mother's eyes, the baby said that he missed her. Sarah and Margot were immediately touched. Carl had been very sensitive lately. The maid immediately went to prepare tea and cake for the master. The baby asked his mother to stay with her. Sarah asked him if he was sure he wanted to stay because her job was completely uninteresting. For the baby, it didn't matter. As long as his mother was working, he was just going to sit and wait. Sarah immediately agreed, promising that when she finished, she would read Carl a story. It has been raining heavily lately, and plans to go boating with my son fell through. The baby was waiting for this moment, but was sure that his dad would not go with them. Carl was convinced that his father didn't like boats, and yesterday he said he was very busy. Out of nowhere, Kian appeared, saying that something was happening behind his back. Sarah immediately began to ask how he got there, but everything was very simple. The door to the office was open, and the Duke decided to look in on the way. He said that his son was right, that his father was very busy, but for him Sarah was more important. The Duke was ready to go boating anytime his wife was not busy. Carl asked his mother to sit next to her when they rode in the carriage. The Duke interrupted his son, saying that he would sit next to his wife since they were husband and wife. A dispute broke out between the Duke and his son over Sarah, each trying to win her over to himself. The girl really didn't like these childish squabbles between father and son. She dreamed that they would become friends without any squabbles, but at this rate, it was impossible to count on it. Sarah interrupted them sharply, saying that arguing was bad and that they would get nowhere. The girl asked both of them to leave her office for a while. She demanded that Kian stop acting like a child in front of his own son. She began to scold him for being a father and behaving this way towards his own child. She then turned to her son, explaining that it was wrong to speak so rudely to his father. Sarah explained that if a father wants to spend time with his son, then it should not be avoided. The boy began to apologize, promising that he would not do it again, begging his mother not to abandon him. The girl said that she had no intention of leaving anyone. It was just that when she and her father quarreled, they needed to be punished. The boys stared at Sarah in confusion. She said that, as punishment, they would have to walk together holding hands. But since it was raining outside, the walk would take place along the corridors of the mansion. Both boys didn't like this idea at all. Kian believed that there were limits to what was allowed, and the baby began to prove that he and his dad were very close. In that case, Sarah asked to leave her room and not return until they made her decision. Turning to Margot, the Duchess asked her to escort the guests out. The maid could barely contain her laughter. Kian picked up his son, saying that unfortunately they had no other choice, so he should hold on tight. Carl agreed, but only because his mother asked. Margot smiled after them, saying that she would definitely tell the lady how tightly Carl squeezed his father's hand. All the servants around were whispering, seeing the Duke with his son. It was the first time they had seen anything like this. Keanu felt awkward under the maid's stares. Carl began to blame his father for everything. The Duke believed that if his son had not been capricious in front of his mother, none of this would have happened. He still believed that if Carl had given him the seat next to his mother, there would have been no punishment. Looking into his son's eyes, Kian understood why Sarah was so angry with him, because it was impossible to feel jealousy towards such a young child. The Duke admitted to his son that he was wrong. Carl was shocked that his father would apologize to him. After a short pause, the baby said that his mother still loved him more. This time, Kian was smarter, answering that even if that was the case, her son should not forget that he was her husband. The boy was again amazed that his father did not even deny his words. He still had so much to learn. Margot admitted that the lady's plan for rapprochement had worked. Returning to Margot's office, They found her sleeping on the table, apparently very tired. Kian decided to move his wife to the bedroom. Margot was going to call the butler for this, but the Duke stopped her, saying that he would do it himself. Surprisingly, Sarah was quite light. The maid reported that the lady had recently lost a lot of weight and suggested that the Duke dine with her to make sure that she was eating well. Kian wasn't against the idea itself. Without expecting it from herself, Margot let it slip that Sarah was very worried about the Duke and whether he was eating properly. Kian couldn't believe his ears that his wife was worried about him. Margot was a good actress, and she began to describe in vivid detail how her mistress had often said that her husband must be lonely, eating alone, and that she would like to keep him company. The Duke promised the girl that he would not tell his wife how he knew everything, because the main thing here was something else. The maid wanted to take Carl to his room, but the little boy refused, saying that he would go with his mother since she had been with him all night, and now it was his turn. The Duke knew perfectly well that his son would not listen to him if he ordered him to go to his room. Sleeping Sarah was even more beautiful. Little Carl noticed that his mother was always beautiful. He also saw that she was very kind to the servants. Kian added that his wife never gets angry at those who are kind to her. Sarah knew what kind of sweets her son liked. Both boys noticed that Sarah had an angelic voice and smile. The girl heard everything, didn't show that she wasn't sleeping. Her face turned red from so many compliments. She was glad that her son and husband had become closer, but she felt like she was going to die of shame. Sarah decided to pretend to be asleep until the end. After a few minutes, there was silence. The girl began to think whether Kian and Carl had left, but she did not hear any footsteps. Opening her eyes slightly, she saw two smiling faces in front of her. With a smirk on his face, Kian asked his wife if she had slept well. Sarah immediately began to joke that she had fallen asleep and had not even noticed her husband and son returning. From the expression on Carl's face, the girl realized that they couldn't be fooled, and then she decided not to make things up anymore, but asked when they had managed to become such friends, since they had just been arguing. The guys reminded her that this was what Sarah wanted. With an ironic sigh, the girl said that praising someone while they are sleeping is so embarrassing. Gently hugging his mother, Carl said that he couldn't help himself when he had such a good mother. The baby lay down on his mother's arm and asked her to rest, as she was probably tired. Looking into her eyes, he asked her to sleep with him. Sarah could not refuse such a beautiful child. Turning to his father, Carl said that it was time for him to return to his room. The Duchess whispered in her son's ear that he could not keep his father at a distance. It wasn't that the baby didn't like his dad, he just loved his mom much more and wanted to hear that she loved him more than anyone else. Sarah hugged her son very tightly. After a moment of silence, the Duke asked Sarah if she would mind if he stayed too. Carl immediately replied that if his mother wanted them to all get along, then he would allow his father to stay. They all lay down together and hugged their son tightly. The baby fell asleep very quickly. It was like Kian's dream had come true, lying in bed with his wife, knowing that she loved him. He had wanted this for so long. Sometimes it even seemed to him that everything that was happening was an excruciatingly difficult punishment. Sarah didn't understand why she was so worried when their sweet baby was right next to them. Pressing Kian's hand to her cheek, the girl promised that when the weather cleared, the three of them would go boating. The Duke agreed to everything, just to be with his beloved. The next morning, Robert noticed that his master was unusually cheerful that day. Kian had no intention of wasting time on idle chatter and was eager to get to work as soon as possible. But his assistant didn't understand where the gentleman was going in such a hurry. The Duke explained that if there was not much work, he would be able to make time for something else. Robert thought that they were talking about an expedition, but he did not like the idea since the master had recently gone on one, and the lands should be in order for some time. There was a knock on Kian's door. It was Sarah. The girl wanted to discuss something. Before the Duke could answer, Charles said that it seemed that the Pope was busy and that they should return later, but the Duke told his family to come in. The Duchess reminded him of her promise to go boating while it was not too hot. Kian replied that he could only spare a day next week, and there was no need to worry about the location, since he had already arranged everything. Sarah was very happy to learn that her husband was also looking forward to this day and was worried. She reminded him that food for the picnic should also be prepared. Robert was also happy, as his sleepless nights at work had left him very exhausted. A couple of days later, Margot packed everything for the ladies' picnic. The weather was nice today. Carl ran very quickly to his mother. The girl stopped him and asked him not to run like that because he might fall, but the baby just wanted to have time to take a place next to his mother. Once again, the boy was incredibly sweet. Sarah asked him to sit in the carriage next to his dad. Due to his age, Carl was not able to hide his emotions at all. He was upset that he would not have to sit with his mother. Kian was already waiting for his family near the carriage. When he saw his wife, he simply froze. Her dress was superb. He warned the girl that she needed to protect her skin, otherwise she might get sunburned. The Duke said that he would take care of this later, but for now it was worth getting into the carriage. Kian spoke with such a red face, Sarah didn't know what to feel at that moment. Carl pulled his mother into the carriage because he was hot. Picking up his son, Kian said that he had cast a cooling spell on him, so he wouldn't be too hot during the trip. The Duke noticed that his wife had also blushed, and with a smile on her face, he asked her to get into the carriage quickly. She wished he would stop smiling. He was even more handsome with a smile. Carl looked around with curiosity. He was interested in everything, even simple grass. The Duke warned that they would need to go out earlier and take a walk. The coachman announced that they had arrived. Kian was the first to get out of the carriage. He gave Sarah his hand and warned her to be careful as she descended. The son intercepted the hand and, with a grin, thanked the gentleman. Kian picked up his son in his arms, who started kicking and screaming to be let go, as he wanted to walk hand in hand with his mother. The Duke was going to carry his son to the lake, because if he got tired before they arrived, he would not be able to enjoy swimming. Kian grabbed his wife by the waist and, looking tenderly into her eyes, said that it was time to go. He was so close that Sarah's heart was pounding in her chest. The Duchess suggested that they go for walks together more often. Her husband and son were so cute that it was a pleasure to watch them. A few minutes later they arrived. The view was simply gorgeous. Sarah could not even imagine that there was such a beautiful place near the estate. Looking at his wife, Kian said that he had always wanted to come here with her and that she had finally kept the promise she had made to him back then. Sarah didn't understand what promise was being discussed. Looking at his son, Kian said that back then, he never even thought that they would have a child. The girl politely replied that she was glad that her husband had managed to keep his word. It was very kind of him. For the sake of his beloved, the Duke was ready to do anything. From his words and smile, the Duchess's heart seemed about to jump out of her chest. Carl saw the approaching boat and began to point at it. First, Kian put his son in the boat and then extended his hand to his wife. The baby was absolutely delighted. He called Sarah over to look at the lake. It was incredibly beautiful. The girl was also very impressed by what she saw. The lake was clear and beautiful, just like the eyes of her little Carl. The man who was steering the boat asked not to worry too much, otherwise he might get seasick. Since it was Carl's first time on a boat, he was very scared when it started to rock and immediately grabbed his mother. Sarah had a strange feeling, as if she was supposed to be holding something else. The girl remembered and immediately started shouting for the boat to be turned around and for them to go back. Kian tried to calm his wife down and get her to sit back down before she fell overboard. Carl immediately began asking his mother what had happened. The girl was in despair because she had forgotten her picnic basket in the carriage. Looking at his wife, Kian didn't understand what the problem was at all, but Sarah started screaming that she didn't want her husband and son to go hungry at the picnic. The Duke said that his wife was still just as sloppy. Some memories surfaced in her head. Sarah fell, and a guy who looked a lot like Kian extended his hand to her and helped her up. The girl couldn't understand what these memories were and why they appeared right now. Sarah felt a terrible sadness. Was it all because of this memory? The boat's manager whispered to the Duke that his wife seemed to be not feeling well. Two pairs of eyes immediately turned to Sarah, asking if she was really that worried about the forgotten basket. The girl began to reassure her son that she was completely fine. Kian didn't even know what to say about this situation. He assumed that something else had happened to his wife. The Duchess knew perfectly well that if she told him about the memory, it would be awkward for both of them. But she did not want to spoil such a wonderful family outing. She pretended to turn away from him and reminded him that he had called her sloppy, making Kian feel guilty. Sarah said she had tried really hard for today. Hugging her son tightly, the girl added that if the Duke wanted forgiveness, he should buy something tasty for her and her son. The Duke breathed a sigh of relief. He said that Sarah could ask him for whatever she wanted. There was nothing he could buy for his wife and son. Kian changed the route, asking to sail in the exact opposite direction from the estate. He also asked to pass on a message to the cab driver to wait at Glory's store. It was the first time Sarah had heard the name of such a store. Did her husband really go there that often? When they reached the shore, Kian extended his hand to his son so that he could carefully descend from the boat. The Duchess saw that her husband and son had become very close. She was so proud of them. If things continued like this, they would be able to fix the bad ending. At that very second, Sarah froze in surprise. Both members of her family asked to hold their hand. The girl smiled broadly. She was very glad that she had such a loving son and husband. Sarah assumed that her clothes were too fancy for this town, since people were staring at her all the time. Turning to Keanu, she asked if there was a clothing store nearby so she could dress more casually. The Duke immediately understood where he could take his wife. A woman emerged from behind the counter and asked what his guests would like. Upon seeing the Duke and Duchess, she immediately began to shout loudly that she could not believe her eyes, that the Duke himself had visited her shop, and with his wife at that. The woman introduced herself as Gloria and said that she was the owner of this small studio. Gloria admitted that she had already wanted to stop by and say hello to the Duke, but that they had visited her store was a great honor for her. Sarah didn't understand that if Gloria and Kian knew each other, then why were they acting so strangely? She decided to switch to things so as not to imagine anything. The woman said that things were going well as usual. Thanking the Duke for coming to her studio himself, she asked why he had not warned her about the visit today. Kian replied that he was just passing by and stopped in because he felt like it. Sarah immediately assumed that there was something between her husband and this girl. The Duke asked Gloria to find him a cape, saying that they had not planned to come here, so the clothes were a little inappropriate. Judging by the girl's expression, she was ready to do anything for the Duke's family and immediately began looking for suitable clothes. Sarah was still thinking about this girl, whether she was just an acquaintance of Kian or there was something between them. The Duchess could not understand why she was so worried about who her husband was communicating with. Gloria was still waiting for some reaction to the cape she had offered to the lady. The girl pretended not to hear and asked directly if Gloria knew Kian. The owner of the studio began to loudly marvel at how sweetly Sarah called her husband. The girl did not understand what this question was about and how she could not know the Duke. The Duchess immediately thought that such an answer meant that she and her husband were very close. The girl asked the lady if she really didn't remember her. It was she, Gloria, the Duke's former knight. During her service, Gloria found a new purpose. Many people liked her clothes, so she decided to open her own boutique. Although the girl swore to the Duke that she would serve him until the end of her days, she left knighthood in pursuit of her dream. Although it was not enough to pay for everything the Duke had done for Gloria, she decided to give her clothes every time he passed by. However, the gentleman always came alone, and today, with his wife and son. Sarah understood everything and asked to pass on the cape. Gloria happily gave it to her, saying that the lady had excellent taste. It was no wonder that she was the Duke's wife. The girl felt uneasy. She thought that she was finished, because at first she just wanted to get closer to her sweet son. Now her heart was beating so fast that it seemed that love for Keanu had settled in the very depths of her heart. She felt so sad to hear his words. It was even strange that the girl wanted to get closer to him, as if she really was Sarah. Little Carl was ready, and he was also very hungry. The Duchess had also finished, so she was ready to run off to dinner as quickly as possible. Sarah left the hat with Gloria. The woman promised to give it to the cab driver when he arrived. Before leaving, the Duchess apologized for her questions, citing a slight misunderstanding. Gloria was not at all affected by these questions, especially since there were various rumors about the Loperin family. The woman was glad that the family was so close to each other. Kian held his wife by the waist, saying that if she hurried, she might fall. How happy Gloria was for her master, that he could finally feel true love. Sarah asked her son how he liked the river rafting, because if it weren't for her mistake, they could have enjoyed it longer. With particular enthusiasm, the little boy replied that he had fun. The lake sparkled so beautifully, and the cool breeze felt so nice, according to Carl. The baby also had a lot of fun chatting with his mother. Next time, Sarah suggested going to a festival or going south. At that moment, their food was brought to them. Mom warned Carl that it was very hot and he should blow on it before eating. Taking a spoon with food, the baby thought and asked his mother to open her mouth quickly. When the baby was feeding his mother, the food seemed much tastier, and she was very sorry that at such moments she could not film him on camera. Kian watched in bewilderment as his wife and son fed each other. Sarah decided not to leave her husband unattended and brought the spoon with food to his mouth. With a smile on her face, she asked him to open his mouth. The Duke did not understand that his wife was not joking now, but was really going to feed him with a spoon. As the Loperin family was heading home, it started to rain heavily. Carl immediately fell into a very deep sleep, apparently very exhausted during the day. The servants told Kian that yesterday his son could not sleep. It seemed that he was really looking forward to today. Sarah thought it was incredibly cute. The Duchess thanked her husband for his concern and for being so kind to Charles. As she fell asleep, she suggested that they play together next time. Kian would agree to anything, just to be with his beloved. Returning to the mansion, the butler offered to carry the young gentleman to his room. But the Duke refused, saying that he could manage himself. Sarah told Margot that she needed to look after her son, so she would go with her husband. Robert intervened in the conversation, very emotionally shouting that when the Duke took his son to the room, he should come to the office, since a lot of work had accumulated. Carl woke up in his room in his dad's arms. Sarah immediately told the baby that he needed to wash and change clothes, and then she would sleep next to him. In all seriousness, the baby refused, saying that he would sleep alone today. Sarah was afraid that something had happened, and that she had offended him in some way. With a sly look, Carl said that he and his dad had agreed on something, so he would sleep alone tonight. The kid clearly wasn't going to tell his mother about their agreement. It was a secret between him and his father. He didn't want to listen to the story today either, citing the fact that his mother was tired. Sarah called her son very caring, because he was so worried about his mother that he even refused his favorite bedtime story. Turning to Kian, the Duchess asked her husband to satisfy her curiosity. Looking at Charles, the Duke replied that his son wanted everything to remain between them. Sarah felt very awkward that they were now sleeping separately, usually all three of them. The girl was very interested in what they had agreed on, but she was sure that her husband's answer would not change, even if she asked again. She was sure that Kian would leave again in the morning. He always went to bed late when they were already asleep and left early in the morning, before they had even gotten up. It then dawned on the Duchess that Charles had left them alone on purpose so that they could talk and become closer. In that case, Sarah walked up to her husband and took his hand. Kian stuttered and asked what she wanted. The girl felt his hands trembling with excitement. The Duke was still afraid that if she got her memories back, everything would change. But she had promised that this would not happen. Sarah asked her husband how he was enjoying his day. Keanu enjoyed it very much. He noticed how his wife and son laughed so sweetly that he couldn't figure out which of them was the child. The Duke said he kept his promise. In Sarah's head, her heroine appeared, all in tears, screaming at her not to believe him, because his promises were worthless. The heroine suffers greatly, repeating that she should not love him, and that she does not deserve happiness. She wanted so much to be happy, to tell him that she loved him too. She never could. The heroine decided that it was better for him to hate her. Sarah couldn't understand why the memories had suddenly come flooding back so abruptly. It is possible that the heroine also loved Kian, but then it was not clear why she treated him so coldly. The Duke noticed that his wife had turned very pale. Sarah lied and said that everything was fine. They had just been driving in the rain, and she was still a little chilly. Covering his wife with his cloak, Kian said he would ask the servants to bring hot tea. Even if Sarah doesn't change, the Duke will remain just as anxious. To fix their relationship once and for all, the girl decided to get to the bottom of the truth and find out their past. The Duchess told her husband that she had long felt that he loved her more than himself. She didn't understand why there was such selflessness. Looking at her tenderly, Kian said that he fell in love with her only because she was her. Sarah reminded him that she had never even paid attention to him. Kian didn't understand what this conversation was about. The Duchess explained that she noticed how her husband was still worried, thinking about their relationship as a sweet dream from which he was destined not to wake up. She asked Kian point blank if he was afraid that her memories would return. Sarah asked her husband to tell her exactly what happened between them. Even though it sounded selfish, the Duke decided to remain silent. He had dreamed of teaching her to smile for too long, so he decided to leave everything as it was, even if it was for a short time. Taking her husband's hand and looking into his eyes, Sarah asked him if even if she loved him and wanted to be with him, he would continue to run away from her. Kian didn't want to hurt his beloved. She hugged him and ordered him not to run away from her, as she forbade it. After these words, Sarah kissed her husband tenderly. After the kiss, she repeated what she had said more than once, that she would continue to love him. With passion in his eyes, Kian asked if she would mind if he kissed her. That's exactly how it was. Sarah asked him not to stop. At this point, he was forced to listen to her. The next morning, as a result, Sarah didn't hear anything from her husband yesterday. She guessed that he would not answer, but she was very angry at how brazenly he avoided her. Margot and the other servants also avoided talking about Sarah's past. If this continues, the girl will never find out anything. The Duchess didn't know what to come up with. It would be good if she met someone who knew a lot about the Duke. A second later, a brilliant idea came to Sarah. She decided to find out everything from Lady Penzel. It seemed the rumors were true, and the Duchess decided to take advantage of the opportunity to ask Lady Penzel about everything. If you play your cards right, you can get a lot of useful information. When the mother came to the library to talk to her son, he suspected something was wrong. Sarah told Carl that his new friend Ron missed him, and they were invited to the Penzel mansion again for a meeting. The girl immediately reassured her son that no one would make fun of him, since they would be the only guests. Carl was surprised that Ron actually wanted to see him. Sarah told about the letter that Lady Penzel sent. Allegedly, her son enjoyed communicating with the younger Mr. Loperin. In that case, Carl suggested that his mother invite guests to their home. It turned out that the baby had long wanted to invite friends to the estate. Sarah was incredibly happy that her son himself wanted to invite friends. Thus, they were further and further away from the bloodthirsty killer. The baby's only condition was that he wanted to be alone with Ron. The maids were bustling about since the morning, tidying up the estate and preparing to receive guests. Ron and his mother were about to arrive. Sarah asked her son if he was ready to meet his new acquaintance. Carl was more prepared than ever. He was really looking forward to this day. The Duchess hoped that the boys would get along as well as they had then. The weather, of course, made me worry. With the start of the rainy season, it was always a nightmare outside. Margot reported that Lady Penzel and her son had arrived. Upon entering the estate, the lady immediately thanked Madame Loperin for the invitation. She was incredibly happy about this meeting. The girl shared that the time in the carriage flew by unnoticed. She was really looking forward to their visit to the Duke's estate. Bowing his head, Ron also greeted the Duchess. When the boys met, Sarah suspected something was wrong. It felt like they were not friends at all, but the opposite. Carl asked his mother for permission to give his guest a tour of the mansion. Sarah, of course, didn't mind. Lady Penzel told her son to behave well. Looking at their sons, the mothers could not contain their emotion. While the children were having fun, Sarah invited her guest to sit down and chat. The lady happily agreed, especially since she couldn't tell him anything through letters, but in person, it would be much better. When the tea was ready, Lady Penzel turned her admiration to the service. She was also very interested in tea. She had never tried anything like it. The girl asked where Sarah bought it. The Duchess ordered this tea from the Western Kingdom, beyond the mountain range. It was said to have healing properties. The girl offered to share the tea with Lady Penzel, so that she could enjoy it after a hard day, or offer it to the Marquis when he was tired. Unfortunately, the Marquis did not like sweets, and the lady wanted to share her tea with a girl who was close to her. Sarah realized that in this case, she would need to give more leaves. Lady Penzel said that her friend loved children as much as the Duchess. Her daughter was a beautiful girl, with hair the right color of pink and eyes as bright as the sun. But it was a pity that her mother was ill. Sarah couldn't believe her ears. A pink-haired girl with a sick mother was an accurate description of the main character, Carl's love interest. For the Duchess, this information was very important. All the troubles began when her mother died. If events develop as in the novel, then something terrible will happen soon. Sarah asked her guest if by any chance the girl with pink hair was turning 7 this year. Having received an answer to her question, the Duchess understood for sure that this was the main character. Lady Penzel was surprised why the Duchess was asking such questions. She was sure that she and her friend and daughter had never met. Sarah lied, saying that when she received an invitation to her son's birthday, she asked the servant if there were any children of the same age as Carl in those circles. Then, supposedly, they told her about their family. Lady Penzel asked again if she remembered correctly. Then little Loperin was only turning 6 this year. She said this because the Viscountess's daughter is now 7 years old. The main character, Kira, was just 8 years old when her mother died, and that's when the series of misfortunes began. Her father, unable to cope with the death of his wife, drowned himself in alcohol. Then a charlatan took advantage of their home's vulnerable state, and her family fell into debt. Soon, everything fell into such disrepair that her father, unable to cope with his feelings of guilt, took his own life. The poor heroine, burdened with debts, came to the Duke as a servant. After she met Carl, the latter found in her a kindred spirit with a similar fate and became obsessed with her. Sarah couldn't let the heroine's family fall. Otherwise, it would be almost impossible to change the plot. The disease that afflicted the Viscountess was called the Lopetus plague, and while it can be treated in its early stages, if left untreated, it spreads throughout the victim's body, gradually taking away their life. The only known treatment was the services of a priest, who would gradually get rid of the miasma in the victim's body. But in the novel, the Viscountess did not seek healing, as it would have cost a lot of money. However, Sarah knew how to cure this disease. The Duchess expressed a desire to accompany Lady Penzel on a trip to the Viscountess, but the lady did not respond positively, only saying that she would send a letter to Lady Fornell. Sarah was even glad that there was a chance to see her future bride. In the novel, she was described as if she had stepped out of a painting. Her thoughts were going in the wrong direction. Now it was more important to find out about that very thing. From the expression on Lady Loperin's face, the Marchioness guessed that she wanted to share something with her. She noticed that her interlocutor was clearly worried about something, and invited her to lighten her load and share her problems. Sarah asked if there were any rumors about her. Lady Penzel knew that her interlocutor did not attend parties or meet other ladies, so she was worried that bad rumors might spread behind her back. The Marchioness tried to calm Sarah down, saying that she had nothing to worry about, that she was just being envied. After all, the girl was practically the main heroine of the romantic story. The love story of Sarah and Kian was very well known, as it turned out. The Duke had admired the girl since childhood, proposed to her, and even vowed to settle all her family's debts. What was their wedding like? A short ceremony, so as not to take away the time they could spend together, away from everyone. The rumors were that Sarah hardly ever left the estate, because she spent all her time on love affairs. Lady Penzel admitted that she even wished that she and her husband were just as romantic. The Duchess knew she couldn't tell her interlocutor that Kian and Carl had initially been afraid of her like a dog. But if she admitted that the rumors were true, she would be too embarrassed to continue the conversation. In the end, Sarah didn't learn anything useful. It looks like she'll have to rely on scraps of her heroine's memories. Lady Penzel asked the Duchess to tell her about her beautiful son. She really wanted to discuss this wonderful baby with her. Sarah seemed to have prepared for this topic. She took out a bunch of diaries. She didn't have a videosphere, but she had diaries filled to the brim with Carl's entries and cuteness. The girls' conversation was suddenly interrupted by a knock on the door. Margot apologized for the intrusion, but it was clear from her eyes that something had happened. One of the knights came to ask the madam for help. The conversation was about the young master Carl and the son of the Marquise. The man said that the young gentleman would soon destroy the training ground to the ground, and he begged the Duchess to stop them. For a second, Sarah froze at what she heard. Once at the training ground, the girl could not understand what had happened. Carl stood in front of her, covered in dirt, with the remains of the flames blazing around him. She demanded that her son explain what had happened. Confusion was evident in his huge eyes, and he stuttered as he tried to come up with an excuse for what had happened. Sarah melted at the sight of his face, but she had to be strict and scold him, because he could get hurt. In a stern voice, she ordered him not to make puppy dog eyes. She began to explain that this was a training ground for the duchy's soldiers, and if he destroyed it, they would have nowhere to train. The boy began to justify himself by saying that at first he simply wanted to show Ron Penzel the estate, but then something went wrong. The kids came to the site, and Carl began to tell them that this was a training ground, and that knights trained here from morning until night. It was too boring for Ron, as the knights on their court were no worse. This statement offended Carl. The Marquise's son looked at his interlocutor and said sarcastically that he had heard that he could control fire. The boy asked Carl if his fire was stronger than this downpour. The kid was very upset by this. He used his abilities, and the knight immediately came running and started shouting that he couldn't use his abilities here. Carl immediately put him in his place, ordering him not to interfere, as this was a training ground, and he was just practicing. The young master also ordered that under no circumstances should his mother be told about this. Seeing the small flame in Carl's hands, Ron mockingly asked if this small flame wouldn't go out if it got caught in the rain. The young master told his guest to look carefully. With a wave of one hand, all the flames spread throughout the entire training ground. It was incredible for Ron. With a mocking voice, Carl asked if, since his guest was applauding him so much, he did not have such abilities. Ron didn't understand where his interlocutor got this idea from. With a wave of his hand, he created a huge whirlwind. He was clearly no weaker than Carl's fire. The young gentleman immediately began to justify himself by saying that if he had wanted to, there would not have been ashes left from the trees. Carl suggested that Ron fight without strength. The Marquise's son was all for it, proposing to put the pride of the houses of the Duke and Marquis on the line. The knight tried to calm the children, repeating that if they got hurt, they would have problems, but all his persuasions were in vain. Bowing his head before his mother, Carl said in his defense that he did not want their family to be worse than the Marquise's family. Sarah ordered her son to change his clothes, and then they would continue. The Duchess also ordered the knight to take out the large branches and check if there was any smoldering fire left anywhere. Lady Penzel also began to have an educational conversation with her son. Sarah stopped her, suggesting that they change the boy's clothes first. It was a good idea, but the problem was that the Marchioness hadn't brought a change of clothes for Ron. She would have to send someone to the estate. The Duchess immediately resolved this issue by saying that she would provide Ron with Carl's clothes, so as not to waste a lot of time on the road. The Marquise thanked Sarah for her concern, but she was incredibly ashamed that the training ground had been destroyed. The girl reassured her guest, saying that she had already asked the knights to settle everything. The ladies went into the house, leaving the children with Margot. Lady Penzel thanked the Duchess for the day and for her indulgence in Ron's rebelliousness. Sarah didn't see a problem with it at all, since they were just kids. Margot brought the young gentleman. Fortunately, during this time they did not have time to get hurt. Ron humbly asked the Duchess for forgiveness, saying that he had learned a lesson from the crime he had committed. The baby also apologized to Carl for causing him inconvenience at his favor. Sarah noticed that Ron even apologized eloquently. Now it was Carl's turn. The little boy bowed his head and apologized to the Marquise for the inconvenience caused. However, turning to Ron Penzel, the young gentleman loudly called him arrogant. Sarah started shouting that you can't do that to friends. At that moment she was very ashamed for her son. She immediately began to apologize to the Marquise for this rudeness. Little Ron burst out laughing and said he knew he was being arrogant. The Duchess did not understand now what had happened. Was it really normal for children, and would it all end like this? Carl asked his guest when he would come again. The kid replied that as soon as the rainy season was over, otherwise he didn't like all this dirt and slush. Something didn't add up here, because the boys had just been fighting in the rain. Ron challenged his friend to fight properly next time. Sarah was already completely confused, but the Marchioness stood there joyfully. She believed that children become closer after a fight, and it seemed that this turned out to be true. The next day, Carl burst into his mother's office without knocking. The Duchess said it was impolite to enter the office without knocking. The boy immediately apologized, citing the fact that he was in a hurry, handing his mother a book that he did not want to read. Carl brought a fairy tale called The Story of the Winter Witch. The kid said that fairy tales were childish, but there was nothing to be done, because if his mother read him books that were too thick, her throat would hurt. Showing concern for his mother, Carl seemed even nicer than before, although it seemed that he could be even nicer. This book had very beautiful and colorful pictures. When the cold winter comes and the world is covered in snow, deep in the dark forest, there appears a place where you can meet a witch. The witch possessed powerful magic that could fulfill any wish. There was nothing a witch couldn't do, but a witch's life was boring. To make her life less bleak, the witch began to offer people a game where the stakes were their souls. If the traveler failed, then they would lose themselves forever. Despite this, there were plenty of candidates, because a person is ready to do a lot for the sake of those he loves. Sarah stopped and wondered if this was really a fairy tale. It was all too cruel. Also, this story reminded her of something. Carl was eager to find out what would happen next to these people. No matter who tried and how hard they tried, no one managed to defeat the witch, because she did not like to lose. She set this all up to collect people's souls. Kind, loving souls made the witch stronger. Carl asked again, if you love strongly, will the magic be stronger? In that case, he decided that he was stronger than Ron Penzel, because he loved his mother very, very much. Sarah hugged her son tightly and said that in that case, she was also very strong, because she loved Carl very, very much. The kid asked what about Dad in that case. The Duchess didn't understand what Dad had to do with it. He asked if Mom loved Dad. Sarah was a little confused by this question. Even just thinking about Keon made her feel like her heart was about to burst out of her chest. She remembered everything he did for her. If it wasn't love, then what was it? The Duchess confessed to her son that she loved his father, although she understood that Keon loved the real Sarah, not her. she still loved him. In her past life, the girl had no one who loved her so much. If you think about it, she never once thought that she wanted to come back. She became so attached to all of them. The Duchess told her son that if she were asked whom she loved, she would answer without hesitation that she loved her son and husband. At that moment, Kian appeared and asked what his family did. Sarah was afraid that he could hear everything and began to shout at her husband to never enter without knocking again. Turning to his wife, Kian said that he wanted to talk to his son alone about what happened yesterday. She asked her husband not to scold Carl too much, since he already understood that he had done wrong. Kian didn't mean to scold his son too much, but he knew that he needed to be raised properly. The Duke reminded him that Charles was the future head of the house and that he was not going to try to teach him anything beyond his capabilities. Sarah told her son to be sure to tell her if his dad scolded him too much. Taking his dad by the hand, the little boy urged him on. Kian was extremely surprised that his son himself extended his hand to him. As he left, the Duke turned to his wife and said that they would talk about her confession before going to bed. Sarah couldn't believe that he had heard everything after all. Time passed quickly. It was already summer. Autumn would soon follow, and the appointed day was drawing nearer. Was Sarah ready for this? The Duchess woke up in a cold sweat. It's good that it was just a dream. But what kind of woman was she in the dream? Touching his wife's forehead, Kian said she had a fever. Sarah said that she had a strange dream. Her husband asked if she was having nightmares again. The girl asked again what she meant by again, and whether this was really not the first time. Kian immediately told her to forget his words. Now his wife needed rest. It was important for Sarah to know if this nightmare was connected with her memories. The Duke had no choice but to tell her that when they first met, they were still children. He still remembered how the little girl introduced herself to him, holding her mother's hand. At that moment she tripped and fell right in front of the Duke. Kian couldn't help but laugh, and Sarah raised her head and looked at him with an angry look. This girl seemed to him clumsy, but quite brave. The Duke thought that this would be the end of their meetings, but she continued to visit him at his estate, and due to their similar age, they spent a lot of time together. Kian was a little annoyed that some girl was invading his personal space. At the same time, he wanted to know about her pain, especially after such a first impression. With each new meeting, he liked her more and more. That was the end of his story. He couldn't tell more for now. Sarah demanded a continuation, because it would be stupid to end the story like that. A few years ago, he promised her something, that they would continue to play with each other as before. However, he was unable to keep this promise. But recently, he succeeded when Sarah lost her memory. Kian didn't want it all to go back, because even without her memories, she still had nightmares. Touching his beloved's forehead, the Duke said that she needed rest. He asked her not to worry, as he would be there to ensure that the nightmares would no longer torment her. A few days later, Margot asked the lady with excitement what had happened between her and the Duke, since they had again begun to sleep in different rooms. Sarah suggested that the maid herself find out from Kian why he was sleeping in another room. Until she gets her memory back, she can't do anything. At night, the Duke slept in another room because he supposedly had a lot of work, and during the day he left the mansion, so even she could not meet with him. It was very difficult for Sarah, because given her husband's past behavior, he would continue to avoid her. The son ran into the Duchess's office. Looking at his mother with his big eyes, he excitedly asked if it was true that he and his father had quarreled. The kid thought it was all because of his bad behavior. Sarah immediately reassured him that they would never quarrel because of him. She explained that she and her dad had a little problem. The Duchess explained that she kept asking her father about things he didn't want to talk about. Carl didn't understand whether this could be a reason for a quarrel. Hugging her son, Sarah said they weren't arguing. They just wanted to think things through. The child knew that his parents slept in different rooms. It looks like she made her son worry. It was important for Carl to hear that his mother did not hate his father and wanted to make peace with him as soon as possible. Although Sarah was a little surprised by his intelligence, she confirmed her son's words. Pointing to the door, the little boy said that he had finished talking to his mother, and now it was up to them. Knights entered the Duchess's office. They immediately apologized to the lady, saying that it was the young master's order. They grabbed the chair on which the Duchess was sitting and dragged it somewhere. Carl reminded him that his mother taught him not to quarrel with friends, in which case she shouldn't quarrel with his father. Sarah was furious at what her son had planned. She was going to talk to Kian, but definitely not in this way. The Duke was also perplexed. His son told him that he wanted to talk about his abilities, so he waited for him in the office. But in the end, Carl sent his mother here. The Duke and Duchess sat and looked at each other in silence. The girl said for Kian to start first. He asked if she was here because of her son, too. Sarah told how scared she was when the knights lifted her chair and carried it straight here. Kian admitted his guilt and apologized for avoiding his wife. Still, Sarah was right that her husband didn't just disappear at convenient times. She asked him why he did it. Once again, the Duke repeated that he did not want his wife's memories to return. The girl recalled that he told her about their meeting, that she was a brave and clumsy girl. Kian admitted that he hadn't intended to do it, but his wife looked so sad that he couldn't stand it. He immediately regretted what he had said, realizing that it would bring her memories back sooner, but she would still remember sooner or later. Even if Sarah doesn't ask him, she will still remember everything, moment by moment. The Duchess didn't understand why he didn't just tell her everything. It would have been enough for her to hear that she would eventually remember anyway. If he said it out loud, he would admit that his happiness now was just an illusion. Keanu was afraid that admitting his insecurities and denying the inevitable would lead to even looking in her direction, striking fear into his heart. Sarah demanded that her husband not dare to call his feelings for her an illusion. If words couldn't convince him that her feelings for him wouldn't change or disappear, then she was going to prove it with actions. Kissing her husband tenderly, Sarah said that she loved him. She vowed that her feelings would remain the same, even if the memories returned. Kian couldn't believe that his wife forgave him for his selfishness. Sarah clarified that they forgive for offenses, but he did nothing of the sort. She promised that she would not ask about the past anymore, asking to sleep together again. The Duchess said that Carl and everyone else is worried about their relationship. Kian kissed his wife's hands and agreed with her. A month later, Margot was still waiting for the monsoon season to end, but now autumn had arrived. The maid asked the lady if she was visiting the Viscountess's estate today. Yes, it was today. Everything necessary was already loaded into the carriage. Thanks to Margot, Sarah could travel without worrying about forgetting something. The Duchess was due back in the evening, until which time Charles remained in the hands of the maid. Lady Penzel was waiting for Sarah in the hall of her estate. The lady reminded him that the lady was going to give the Viscountess some tea leaves, and that conversations over tea always pass too quickly. The Marchioness said she would be glad if the Duchess called her by her first name. Sarah didn't mind at all. From now on, the Duchess called the Marquise Vanessa. Sarah was very happy that she had become so close to the mother of the second main character. It was great proof that she was changing Carl's future for the better. The butler greeted the ladies, saying that the mistress was expecting them. In front of Sarah stood a very beautiful girl with pink hair. She kindly greeted her guests. The Viscountess said that she had been feeling much better lately and thanked the Duchess for her visit. Sarah was very pleased that the lady had made time for the appointment despite her health. Just then, the maid brought tea and treats. Vanessa had already managed to tell her friend about the tea, that well-brewed leaves could relieve pain. After so many days of bitter medicine, a cup of tea felt very refreshing. The Viscountess was curious why the Duchess wanted to speak to her personally. At this point, Sarah became worried. She began to calm herself down and come up with a reason on the fly. She decided to refer to her son, saying that she had heard that the lady had a daughter the same age as Carl, and since she had rarely attended social events, she had not been able to meet all the ladies. Vanessa chuckled and reminded her friend that she had her. Sarah said that she was able to become friends with the Marquise because they both love their children madly, which is why she wanted to meet the Viscountess. According to the Duchess, it was difficult to find those who love their children as much and truly care for them. Sarah really hoped she didn't sound rude. Moreover, if the Viscountess's guest values her son so much, then she only has more reasons to tell about it. How sweet her Leia is. The girl ran into the room and rushed to her mother. Sarah saw this incredibly cute girl